Good morning.
How are you?
Oh, let's see. Good question.
Let me just turn up the volume again, sorry.
How are you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Bored as shit, being working from home all the time. But what can you do?
Well, I'm fully vaccinated.
Oh, congratulations.
I'm going on a vacation in a few weeks to Arizona, New Mexico, and the Slot Canyons. How to take vacation and still be distanced from everyone else.
Well, great. They're still probably, I don't know, another month, 6 weeks or something from getting most people vaccinated here, but it's slowly getting there. But it'll happen. So just for today, were we half expecting Ted to kind of explain his Stub Networks thing a bit more this time, or?
I didn't put it on the agenda, and he didn't ask for anything, and he didn't provide anything.
That's what I thought. But I think we had said at the last IETF meeting that would be a nice thing to happen. It just didn't happen. Okay. So I made some chair slides. I don't know if you've done some as well, or?
Oh, no, I didn't. Perfect.
I just uploaded them. Do you want me to do the presentation screen sharing thing, or do you want to do it? I don't really care.
Either way. Now, I don't have access to Jabber in my current environment.
Okay, I do.
I can do Cody MD, so I can probably go ahead and do minutes.
That'd be great. Okay, so should I do the projection and then you can do the
minutes? If you're able, that'll be great. And you saw Daniel did provide some slides, which I approved.
I saw him there, yeah. Okay, I'm the only one in the Jabber room, so that's fine. And okay, so let me just check how the screen sharishness works well or not.
I may need to, let me see, I don't think I should have to make you a host, but
the boss. Well, let me just try.
Make presenter. Now that should certainly help. Yeah.
So I think I'm sharing a screen, even though you can't really see it, but
no, I see it.
You see it, okay, good. Because I don't hear. It's wonderful the way they make these things. So that's that one. I probably made some mistake in the chair slides, and that's Daniel's slide deck, and that's all those are the materials we have. I just left that Stub Networks thing as a possible agenda in case. We'll see if Ted even turns up. Okay. That looks like it's working, so yeah?
Yeah.
Great. In that case, I think it's time for me to make coffee. I shall reappear in a minute or two.
Sounds good.
All right. Talk to you in a sec.
Hi, Barbara.
Good morning, Daniel. How are you?
Fine. Stephen is not here.
No. He's getting some more caffeine. But he's got slides ready to go and things.
Okay, so did you receive my slides?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Now,
I
I
guess.
did think that we had some discussion, and by the way, I started reading through, I didn't finish, I'm sorry to say. I am going to have some, at least from the beginning of it, I guess, we'll need to think about as we move forward and anything about having sorry, my brain still just isn't quite working. Document Shepherd, I think the intro probably needs to be rewritten to be just a little more formal.
Okay.
And less chatty. But anyway, so I think probably, wherever last call happens, if we move this up to the interior or if we try to do it here, I'll probably have some comments about that sort of thing. But I am a bit concerned with still the lack of, I guess, review that we've been seeing. And how many authors did you get a reply from, by the way?
So I think from for DHCP I only received so Ralph and who's the other one?
Ray? Did I see
Yeah,
him?
I mean Michael, Ray, Ralph, and one guy from ISC, Tim Thomas.
Okay.
So I guess that's the ones I've received some feedbacks.
Okay. Good morning, Ted. Oh, he doesn't have audio. No, he does.
Yeah, I made the presentation quite short because I am unsure. I think I saw this presentation as more open to discussion on how we move the work forward.
Yeah.
As a technical presentation.
Though I do want to see if, we can maybe, see if people have read it. If they do have comments, thoughts on it. So yeah. And I see Ted is here. Ted, did you want to talk any during this meeting about the stub networks problem? Have you progressed that at all? If you hear me. And maybe you don't. Oh, okay.
I guess Ted may not be entirely present for them in the meeting just yet.
No. Or just not finding that mute button. You never know. These things can be so hard to find sometimes.
He's got a weird icon.
That's the mobile device.
Oh, okay. So maybe he's in a noisy environment or something. So.
Or he's just in his iPhone. I mean, he does work for Apple now. And I have used my iPhone before. And hopefully, we don't have any of the issues that IoT Ops had.
Okay, Barbara, Ted is in chat, but he says he's seeing us talking but not hearing.
Uh-oh. I think the problem's on his end because we are talking to each other.
Yeah.
Now that chat I can open.
Okay, now he hears us. Okay, good.
Oh, good.
You can ask again, so I suppose.
So Ted, did you want to talk to any today about stub networks?
So I noticed it wasn't on the agenda, and my schedule was such that it seemed like it would be okay to do it in a different meeting, if that's all right.
Yeah, if you want, we can schedule a different interim to discuss stub networks, and we could probably advertise the discussion to some of the other working groups that are interested.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's a slightly different, possibly a slightly different population than is interested in the naming architecture stuff.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll discuss that with the full working group since the call really starts in a minute. And we'll probably come to that conclusion.
Cool.
Are you using the link provided by the Secretariat for note-taking?
I am trying to get into that, but it's not, well, okay, there's multiple. So let me try the other one. Where? Because I see that in one place it has an Etherpad link, and in another place it has a CodeMD link, and I was going
Yeah,
to use
the Etherpad link is a lie.
Yeah, but if I go to just the list, the meeting list in one case, it actually has an Etherpad link.
Oh,
But when
weird.
I added the CodeMD link that's provided in another place, I should probably mention that maybe on tools, I think.
So does it just say it's an Etherpad link, or is it actually an Etherpad link?
No, I in the hovering process, I looked at the link. It was an Etherpad link.
Weird.
So I'll mention that to the tools people. Okay. So let's see. I should go ahead and start. Okay, let me edit. Darn it. Okay, so Stephen is presenting the slides, as hopefully everyone can see, and hopefully everyone hears me. I am hearing a bit of echo.
Barbara, I was just going to suggest, I think you're authenticated, so it might be you that has to hit the start recording button.
Ah, the start recording button.
That's the one I always forget to hit.
Yeah. Okay. I am hereby hitting the start recording button. If that terrifies the bejeebies out of you, flee now. Okay, actually it says that it has been recording for the past 14 minutes. So I'm sorry if you didn't flee in time. Okay, apparently that's automated. So it is being recorded. Okay, with that, this is a meeting, an interim meeting of the HOMENET working group. I do see that our illustrious AD, Eric Vink, has joined us. There is a link to where the meeting materials are. I will be taking minutes on CodeMD. Oh yes, Note Well. Is anybody not familiar with Note Well or would like to have an entire reading of this to them? I didn't think so. Okay, so Note Well. These are the chairs. Our AD is Eric Vink. I see that we actually have both area ADs on the call, so Eric Klein is here as well. Don't confuse them. Those are the working group pages, moving right along. Well, hopefully you already know that these are the WebEx details because you're here. And if you're not here, you're not seeing this slide. That is the Jabber room. Stephen said that he would be paying attention to the Jabber room. I am not on Jabber because my current environment isn't supporting it. The Etherpad, I was a bit lax. I didn't get it started, but that is where we'll be putting the blue sheet. Is there anybody willing to help with minute taking, by the way? Well, hopefully it won't be too hard, and I will be there trying to take minutes. Chat line, use Jabber. You know, we have a small enough group that I don't object to also chatting on the WebEx if, you know, that's what you feel like doing. So either way works fine for me. And so today we'll be focused on the HOMENET front-end naming delegation and the DHC options. For stub networks, well, actually, let's go ahead and we'll just mention the conversation we had with Ted about that. What we'll try to do on stub networks is set up a separate interim to go for stub networks, and we'll invite the other working groups that are interested in stub networks, you know, just so that they know that that's something that we're talking about. And I'll do a doodle poll for that. Ted, I think that's kind of what we discussed. And so probably May, late May. What do people think?
Sounds like a fine plan.
Target week or target weeks.
So maybe, I mean, I think that sounds reasonable. Probably, you know, starting a conversation on the mailing list a little bit ahead of that would probably make it more useful.
Yeah.
So let's say 2 or 3 weeks after the mailing list conversation starts. How about that?
Sounds good.
So that means like, so I'm assuming, Ted, if you'd be the one to start that discussion, if we want a late May interim, that means maybe in a couple of weeks, kind of kick off a discussion on the mailing list.
Yeah, I need to do an update to the draft, and then I think it makes sense to start that discussion. So I'll try to get that done in the next week or so.
That'd be great.
Okay. And so if there's no other administrivia, and Eric, did you have anything you wanted to say? That would be Vink.
Nothing at all.
Okay, perfect. Then let's get going, and I'm going to go on mute and try to catch up a little bit on the minutes while Daniel presents.
So Daniel, I'm projecting, so just shout next slide whenever that's the correct thing to do. You might need to unmute yourself, Daniel.
Yeah, that was to avoid the echo. Okay, so today I'm going to present the two drafts, so the front-end delegation and then the associated DHCP options. I do not intend to have to go over the full detail, have a detailed technical presentation, but it's more, I think the way the discussion should be how we move those drafts forward. That's my intention. If you have any comment, any question, feel free to interrupt. I think we are a small numbers, and we can have that conversation style. So next slide. So, I mean, what has changed recently with what recently means? So on the front-end naming delegation, we worked on, I'm saying, on cleaning up a little bit the document. So using uniform terminology. We also added some clarifications as we could do anytime we read a document. But on the technical aspects, we formalized a little bit more how to configure the HOMENET naming authority. And we had that configurations being reviewed by Carsten, so thank you, Carsten. We removed some unnecessary text, and so that's 5 pages less of examples, for example, most likely. And then on the DHCP options, we synchronized the terminology used in that document with the one in the front-end delegation. Mostly, well, the DHCP options are just one way to configure the SGNA. So it's better to have them fully aligned for a better understanding, and rather than repeating things, it's just being reference and having the description in one place. We also remove some unnecessary DHCP options and add IANA and security section consideration section, and address the comments from Bernie on that. So we think that both drafts are ready for working group last call. And that's, so I'm going to recap briefly what are in those drafts. Next slide. So, I mean, it has been, I mean, there has been different period of activity in those drafts. So if I recall the history, we started having those drafts when HOMENET was created. Then we were almost request to work on the naming architecture, and then go back to how we could outsource this DNS zone from a HOMENET router. And so I mean, the big, and we had basically two periods of activity, one in the beginning of the HOMENET working group and one at the end. And the main change was that in the first case, we assume that we will have some kind of out-of-band configurations. And so all the necessary parameters would be agreed between the two parties. While in the second phase of this document, we emphasize on how can we reduce the parameters that need to be agreed, and have some sort of negotiations between the two parties. So this is why we had those two peaks of activity, and in between a long dormant period. So the scope of this document is we would like that HOMENET is able to manage a zone, but instead of exposing the zone to the internet from the HOMENET, we would like that the zone can be exported to a DNS infrastructure. So basically you have a full set of devices, and instead of having your CPE, that is, if you want to reach those devices from outside, you have to publish those to the DNS. And instead of having your DNS zones being hosted on your CPE, we would like that the CPE can export that zone to a DNS outsourcing infrastructure, like Dyn, like any cloud service provider. So we have, in the current specification, we have basically 3 channels. One, which is the distribution channel, which means once a cloud provider got the zone he has to publish, he spread that into the DNS servers he's managing, and that exposing the zone to the internet. So this channel is completely outside of the scope of the document. And then you had another channel, which is how the cloud provider and your HOMENET can exchange the information related to the zone itself and synchronize that zones. So this is a primary secondary. So it's entirely being handled by very classical DNS mechanisms. And so most of the specification is about the specification of the control channel, which is how the HANA, which is hosting that zone, can agree with the DNS outsourcing infrastructure on how the synchronization channels should be set, as well as some parameters that needs to be published. So this is mostly how the protocol, how the architecture is being defined. So next slide. So the control channel, if you need a negotiation, how you do that? We use entirely DNS and only DNS to have those kind of exchange, which means when the HANA is willing to get some information, he's using an AXFR request. And when the HANA is willing to push some information to the DOE, he's going to use a DNS update. The reason we use only DNS messages is to have, to only rely on DNS as opposed to another protocol such as HTTP, for example. So we had that discussion, and that was the choice that has been made. So next slide. So how we configure, so I forgot to mention that all channels are protected with TLS. And we also have some discussion why we use TLS. And the default protocol is DNS over TLS. So how to configure that? So we defined an information model. So that's new in this version. And the only thing we need is the registered domain, which is the domain for the HOMENET. And there is no way the HOMENET can guess that domain name. I mean, we have to provision the network with that one, as well as which is the distribution master. We are outsourcing the zone. And those are the two. So we only have two mandatory parameters. Then we have a number of additional parameters. One of those, it could be the transport layer we're going to use. So it could be DOT, DOH, DOQ. So that's depending on how things are moving. And you can also add some additional parameters that are, of course, optional as well. One of those is the ACL, which defines which are the IP addresses the DNS outsourcing infrastructure is going to use, so that you can configure appropriately your firewall. But the default is that it's going to be only use one IP address, for example. So so that's it's not a these are the envisioned way to configure the HANA. So so one way, the reason we have this information model is that we thought that it could be useful if you're on an interface with your registrar or your ISP, and it just mentioned, yeah, use that link with this JSON object to embed the configurations. And so so it's one way to configure the HANA. And I think in next slide, we have another way to configure this HANA. So of course, whichever way you use to configure your HANA, you expect that the same parameters are going to be provided. And in one way we use to provision the HANA is DHCP options to carry all those parameters. In that case, we reduce the number of parameters. We don't have all of them. So why did we have a special attention to DHCP options? One of those is that ISP has a special place in this ecosystem. The first thing is that the ISP is assigning you the IP address. So he's going to manage on your behalf the reverse zone. So he's only there for one reason. And the other one is that in some cases, the ISP might also be able to assign you a forward zone. And so, and given that for many ISP, the CPU is also managed by the ISP, I mean, we have a close relationship between those two. So next slide. So this is a sort of exchange we are considering. So you have a DHCP request where the CPE is asking, which is my registered domain? What is my, provide me information about my distribution master and the reverse distribution master. And the DHCP response provide those information. For the registered domain, it's FQDN. For the masters, it's FQDN and the specification of the transport layer being used. And I think that's the end of the presentation. So I'm open to any questions, any comment.
Daniel, if you allow me to jump into the queue without any hat, I chat with Ted in the chat, and we were wondering whether DO, RFC 8484, supports any transfer of DNS. As far as I know, but from the top of my head, I am far from being a specialist of DO, it's only queries.
Yeah, so yeah, so what we just allocated the code points for DO and DNS over quick. Is just I mean the main purpose was to show that we're not stuck to one protocol and that can evolve over time, but we did not discuss that at all. And maybe I'm understanding that comment as it might be better to remove the request for assigning those code points.
I would say so, because that's no
Okay.
protocol right now behind, and only specify then the draft in dpri for transfer over TLS.
Okay.
It's I think you know it's good to have the ability to add a new transfer protocol if that becomes needed, but you shouldn't put anything in that you can't already implement, because otherwise it's just going to be confusing.
Okay. Yeah. I agree. It's one of the reasons we add those is because I didn't want the text to be stuck on one. So I leave the option open, but I understand that yeah, now not we are not stuck with that one, we can remove those.
Yeah.
It's going to be only the INS section being updated. So.
Yeah. Another question that I had, Daniel, is has anybody implemented this?
Yeah. So I think Ray is in the list. So we had an implementation from Ray. And Michael also worked on a.
I've run Ray's code.
Oh, okay. Michael, take the floor then.
And I expected to have a different client implementation, but it didn't get finished yet.
So you feel like this is Ray's code has implemented the protocol roughly as described in the document, and it seems to work?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. By the way, you have a very wrong employer address for Ralph Weber. Just FYI. It's like way out of date.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Yeah, you've got him working at Nominum.
We're not getting responses from him as part of the issue.
Oh, okay, I can maybe try and track him down. Oh, I did have a comment. You put up the chart that's, I think it's figure 1 from the front and naming delegation document.
Yeah.
And it's a bit hard to read, actually.
Mm.
There are a couple of issues. One is, I think, I realize it would make the diagram bigger, but the fact that you don't mention that the in-adder zone is also available or can also be managed this way feels like a significant omission. And then, like, it's not really clear what the relationship between the HOMENET authoritative server and the HNA is. And it might be nice to put in some arrows or something that makes that a little clearer.
So the two comments, which zone? You mean the reverse zone?
So
Yeah,
Ted-
right, exactly. You've got example.com, but you don't have
Okay.
in-adder.arpa
So
or
we could make
IPv6 yeah.
we could make the diagram just a bit taller by adding some lines where it says example.com. We could put in-adder ARPA or IP6.ARPA.
Yeah. I think it
and
would be
then
fine to
and
just do one of those.
and then you're saying that the box on the upper left HNA doesn't have any arrows to HOMENET authoritative server. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess we can connect them somehow.
Yeah. And then I don't know, did you guys talk about redacting the HOMENET zone, or is that out of scope for this?
What do you mean by redacting? Like stopping to run it, serve it?
No, redacting meaning leaving out things you don't want to be public.
Yeah, so it's really supposed to be opt-in. It's not, you know, the GUI that I imagine is one where you have on the left, you have, you know, everything discovered in MDNS or DNSSD, and that the administrator really has to click on the things they want on the right, and then they send them over. And so it really is opt-in that way. That's the interface I imagine. And I mean, so the part that's kind of the convenience or something is the fact that they don't have to copy the IP addresses over from left to right. And of course, if IP addresses change for whatever reason, then they would be copied over, they would be updated. And further, I would think that it would probably filter out privacy temporary addresses, would not publish those either. So if you have something that is offering a service but is also going outbound with a private address, then it wouldn't be linking that publicly.
Yep.
I think we are discussing those points in the draft. But if there is anything more, yeah, we're happy to have those. I think it's mostly related to privacy configuration as well as the setting of your network, because that's
yeah, the reason I was asking the question is because in the diagram you only mention the public HOMENET zone, and you know, implicitly there's a private HOMENET zone, but I don't see, like, and presumably the private HOMENET zone is what the HOMENET DNSSEC resolver actually advertises on the HOMENET. So that just feels like an omission in this diagram. But I realize that the diagram is already kind of complicated, so maybe that's not a solvable problem.
Yeah, so I think the other question is whether we wanted to really get into that other side of things, the private HOMENET zone. And I found, I'm not opposed to discussing it, but it seems to me that any amount of text we put in there fosters the potential for more confusion rather than less.
Yeah. I mean, to me, the thing that's missing is just the mention that there does potentially need to be a private HOMENET zone. I think talking about how it's managed or anything like that would be out of scope for this document. But
so if we could find space in this diagram for a box with an arrow pointing to the left, saying private HOMENET zone, and not connected to anything else, would that be something that would help you?
Yeah, or you know, you might put the private HOMENET zone in the authoritative server and have an arrow between. So you currently don't have any arrows between the public HOMENET zone in the in the HOMENET authoritative server and the public HOMENET zone in the HNA, which I think are the same zone.
Yeah.
And the diagram sort of implies that hosts on the home network are going to be querying the public HOMENET zone, which I don't think is correct. So that's really what I'm kind of calling your attention to. So it might make sense to, in the HOMENET authoritative server zone, to have the public HOMENET zone and the private HOMENET zone, and make it look like the private HOMENET zone is what's getting updated and queried, since presumably it is. And then, you know, have a similar arrows between the public and private HOMENET zone, so that indicating that the public HOMENET zone is updated from the private HOMENET zone, but not talking about how that happens. I mean, maybe that's too much detail, but when I look at this document, I'm afraid that somebody's going to read this document and think, oh, we're proposing to publish your entire HOMENET zone on the internet, and that sounds bad, so I'm not going to go any further.
Yeah, I think I got your point. I think that's feasible, yeah, I will see what we can put in the diagram, but it sounds that it's not impossible. I think we also have enough text on that, but I will double check to clarify that.
Okay, thanks. By the way, when you're doing DNSSD, I think that the temporary addresses aren't published in the at all anyway. Stuart might correct me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So you would only see the stable address in the DNSSD advertisement.
Ted is correct. Even with multicast DNS on the local LAN, it only publishes stable addresses. Privacy addresses only exist for outbound connections for the sake of anonymity, and they're not expected to stay around. So it wouldn't make sense to publish those as addresses for inbound connections.
So point being, you don't need to filter those.
Yeah, I was just thinking out loud that you probably would filter them if they showed up, but yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
But how do you know?
Well, it is a good question, right?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, you know, if the document's not talking about it, we don't really need to care about that here. But I just mentioned it because you'd said that it was being filtered, and I think the only place that really it can be filtered is on the host, because the host is the only thing that knows what's a stable address and what's a private address.
I think that ultimately you're right, but there are some other patterns that we do recognize as being, you know, Slack addresses and stuff. But absolutely, you're right.
Yeah, and I guess right. You have to filter out link local addresses, which would be published in MDNS.
So
and ULAs.
Right. Yep.
So just to clarify, does MDNS use any other non-private IP addresses?
So MDNS is going to advertise your link local address, because
Okay.
MDNS is link local, right? So
Yeah.
so for MDNS, it's always going to work, and you know which link it works on. And then it's also going to advertise your stable public addresses, whether they're ULAs or GUAs. And so that's where the filtering out of ULAs comes in, as Michael was just mentioning.
Okay.
One other small comment on the DHC document is that DHCP document is that you never actually say what an HNA is in the DHCP document, and it would be worth having a reference, because when I was reading the document, I actually found that, like, I was like, what the hell is an HNA? Because I read that document first.
Okay, that's easy to do.
I was like, okay, HOMENET naming architecture?
Yeah.
Anyway, otherwise, I mean, this looks good.
So Daniel, just a question. You said you think this is ready for working group last call. Did you want to talk about that now, or wait till the very end?
Well, unless we're not at the very end, anytime. I mean, if you want to break that now, or I'm fine.
So I guess I mean, if other people have technical discussion to have, that's probably better to do first. So there is a question in the chat, for example, from Eric Klein. What's the auth story there?
So, so it's I think the answer is it's a long story because the draft has a long life. So if I recall correctly, when we had some authors that were present at the very beginning, and that had some contributions to the document. I think it was we started that when Ted was an AD. So and then things changed. Some people were working on different companies. Some people moved out of the IETF. So so this is why we had quite a long list of authors. My understanding is that some
Are you talking
authors,
about the author story or the authentication story?
Yeah, I was taking auth for the authors.
Yeah, I think Eric's asking about authentication. I was like, that's a lot of background for this, but yeah. Eric, so I mean, one of the reasons why we put the CDDL and this JSON blob in there is because we recognize that the people building HOMENET routers and the people doing the outsourcing are not necessarily in the same vertical, and that people want to be able to go to other third parties, right? And so by defining this blob that you basically have to copy and paste, you, for instance, could copy and paste from one to the other, that at least we're getting all of the parameters clearly articulated and not making people type them in and get them wrong. Of course, that could also happen through some kind of an OAuth 2 process where the process starts at with a web interface to your HOMENET router. You say, I want, to go to this particular outsourcing agency, and you get redirected, and you log in with OAuth, and then what comes back is a post from your browser to your HOMENET router to put the right blob in. So that's strictly configuration, right? But it is authorization. You are saying, I want to publish my zone to this external entity, and I've just told you what the distribution master is, and then we expect that is validated in TLS using this typical 6125 mechanisms that we have. So the synchronization channel is DNS over TLS, right? And we thought along hard about, people are saying, oh, it should just be a JSON interface and everything should be JSON up and down. And Ray convinced us that it was easier to do with DNS, and that there were fewer moving parts, and that the hard part was getting the TLS not there, and that once you had the TLS there, the data format was irrelevant at that point. You might as well be in DNS format rather than JSON. Does that answer your question, Eric?
Perhaps. I think I have more reading to do. I'm just kind of wondering why how the ISP trusts the HOMENET to update.
So there is a zone transfer, right? And the question is perhaps better asked is, how does the HNA accept that the ISP's distribution master is authorized to do the AXFR, right?
That's another good question. I was thinking the other direction.
So that happens in this synchronization channel that is set up in that space.
Okay, thank you.
And Ray writes there. So I didn't want to get into the detail right here because I'm still asleep, but I get it wrong. But Ray points at, yes. So there is a certificate provided by the HNA when in the synchronization channel, and that's how that works.
Yeah, that's what I was missing. Thank you.
So any other technical questions, comments before we go to working group last call, Ari?
I did have one question in looking through this was, so I do notice that you've got the list of various DNS over quick DNS over HTTP and DOT and DO53. Is there any thought, and you said you're going to get rid of the DOH, is there any thought to just creating a registry for this and having it in the IANA so that it can be modified as needed? Or?
Yeah, that's I mean, this is how we do. I mean, basically, you have a DHCP options that says a field transport, and you had some cut points saying DNS or DNS over TLS, and I added the others. So, I mean,
I think we added the others because once we put two of them, we went, and then people are going to be like, well, what about? And we're like, oh, just throw them in. Right. So we weren't really thinking about whether zone transfers over DOH was a thing or not. We were just, let's be inclusive.
Okay, yeah, I think it looked like they were intended to be an IANA registry, but I didn't see them in the IANA considerations.
No, I don't think we made it that way because we didn't
Oh,
imagine
okay.
that. I don't think I imagined that there would be more than the 4 that we already had there. But you're right. You know, we should remove the ones that really actually don't make, I guess, really don't make any sense. And, you know, provide an IANA, considerations on that. And I think it'd probably just be specification required. IETF action, because if someone comes up with a document that says how to do AXFR over HTTP, DNS over HTTP, then they would extend our document.
So there is an IANA section for the DHCP options, and I'm hearing that we should move. I mean, we should not move, but we should have another IANA registry for the main document, the architecture document.
Well, I didn't, you had the IANA considerations, but these particular options weren't in those considerations as far as I could see. Or maybe it wasn't clear to me, but anyway. Just something to think about. Just, yeah.
I think it does need to be a registry, and I think that it's actually important not to list anything you don't know how to do or don't want done. For example, you list DO53, but the document basically says that DOT is mandatory. And so I don't think that you really want to list DO53 because you don't want it used, right? You want DOT to be used. So I would only list things that you actually want to be used, and you know, a future protocol that we don't know about yet that we decide to switch to is probably going to be better than DOT, not worse than DOT. So anything that's worse than DOT, you definitely shouldn't list.
Yeah, that's not a problem for to add. One question is, I'm just opening the DHCP options. What do you think should we go for a specification required or
256 slots, right? So is it 1 byte or 2 bytes?
So for the DHCP, I think I use 2 bytes.
Oh, well, then that's enough that you're never going to run out. So I would just say, you know, maybe specification required just because you want people to document what they're doing, but I really doubt you're going to have a problem.
Okay.
I would agree.
I mean, one additional reason to say specification required is so that we don't wind up in a situation where somebody adds a code point just so that they can be incompatible. But I don't know why anybody would do that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, any other technical comments or questions before we start thinking about processing stuff? And on the process stuff in the chat there, I suggested a couple of chair-like, process-like questions. So if anybody wants to quibble with those, now's a good chance. I don't know that we're going to get a huge rush of people all send their review, because I guess we all know how quiet the working group list is and so on. So, but I think it's worth asking the questions before we figure out what to do. So, if you're okay with that, Barbara, I'll go ahead and just ask those questions.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just wondering how many people have read one or both of these recently, and you can define recently yourselves. If you have, maybe just type a yes or something into the chat, or use your microphone. And I mean non-authors. Okay, so the rush seems to have died down there in the chat. For the audio, I guess we had 4 people with the yes or partial yes. Okay, so how many people are willing to review these documents? And in this case, again, if you can state your willingness in the chat or in audio, that would be great. Barbara says yes. Ted says yes. Eric Fink says yes. Well, and
not the yes you want though.
Chris Box says yes. Great. Karsten will review partly. Okay, and that rush has stopped now. So okay, so we've got like, other than chairs and AD, we have like 3, I think, is it? Or yeah, we have 3 people who are not chairs or AD saying they will do a review. And then the third question I had before we figure out what this all means is, does anyone violently object to thinking about progressing these? Does anybody think that we, either technically or we just don't have enough commentary and review to claim consensus? So is there anyone who sort of says, really, we shouldn't do this here now, we should figure out some other way of doing it? And if so, why? So I'm hearing silence on that, not saying anything in the chat. Ted is encouraging us to finish this. Okay, so it sounds like we have the position we kind of knew we had, which is that we have some work that people think is worthwhile, and we have a problem progressing it because we don't know that we've gotten enough review. This is something I think we discussed with Eric at RAD before, and so it might be that getting a review, progressing it with a working group last call, but then getting a further review from one of the area directorates and treating that like another last call or something like that.
You can do it the same thing, right? So you may want to ask an early review or just right now, and at least at the INT directorate, to get the DNS and the HTTP pass on it. And I would strongly suggest as well, when you issue the working group last call in HOMENET, you copy DNS ops and deprive for the front-end naming delegation, and you copy DHC working group for the DHCP option as well, just to be sure.
Sure, I think those are good suggestions and well worth doing. My fear is that we won't actually get that much more review, and we'll still be kind of left feeling a bit short in terms of being able to claim rough consensus. But we could try.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, we can try, and if we try and it doesn't quite work, then it's your problem, Eric, anyway, right?
Of course. I said nothing, right? So it was somebody faking me, right? It's simply somebody using the French accent pretending to be Eric, but that's okay. Oh, no, I will assume it, no problem, of course.
Okay, so it sounds like the plan. I'll ask in a second if the authors want to do an update before we start this, but it sounds like we have some people to review it, a small number. The authors think it's ready with the, some changes as per discussion today. We have a few people to review it. We do a working group last call, promote it to DNS OptiPrive, ask for an early integer review, maybe an early sector review. See what we get, and then hand it over to Eric and let him use his enormous wisdom to solve the problem, if there is one. Does that sound like a plan to everybody? Or anybody prefer another plan? Hearing silence. Then I guess the question is to the authors, do you want to respin these on the basis of today's discussion, or before we start asking for these reviews? You're muted, I think, Daniel.
We're going to update the document, but expect that to be done in the few coming days. And I don't think it's going to have a huge impact on the working group last call.
Yeah, and the only thing is, if we are asking for inter sector DNS op etc. to review it, we don't want to change the version midstream.
Yeah. So wait a week. I'm going to update that. And as soon as we have the update, we can kick the working group last call.
Okay, so that sounds like a plan. Barbara, does that sound like a reasonable plan to you? I know you're busy taking notes, but
Yes, we will wait a week and then start WGLC, but making sure that the draft update has come through.
okay, and we can craft a cover note for the working group last call that tries to explain we're encouraging lots of review because of the situation we're in. All right, that's anything else to talk about on these drafts? Not hearing anything. Oops. So this is our agenda. We've done 1, 2, and 3, I think. 4 we earlier discussed and figured it would be better to have this as a separate topic in after Ted has started some discussion on the list in a few weeks, and maybe towards end May have another interim on that topic. It's just something that people I think were interested in at the last IETF meeting, but probably it needs a bit more time in the oven or something, I guess. So 4 we've decided to punt till end of May-ish.
Last time we discussed it, I promised to do an update before we discussed it in an interim, and it seems like that's worth doing. So
yeah, that's and so that brings us to 5, I think. Any other business?
Just one thing to remind the participants of this interim meeting to fill in the blue sheet. There are, I think, 12 people in the blue sheet, and we are 18 in the call. It'd be cool to get all the numbers correct.
Good thinking. So please do fill in the blue sheet, which is in the Codium D thing, isn't it? Up at the top, down the bottom. I'm not sure where it is.
Yeah.
It's down at the bottom of the Codium. How do you pronounce that? Codium.
I just say Codium D.
Okay. So down the bottom of that page is the blue sheet. Please put your name there if you've been enjoying this session, or even if you haven't. Okay. Any other business? Don't think so. Barbara, anything else?
No, I'm good. Thanks. I think it was a good call. Look forward to getting some movement on these drafts and also on the stud networks.
Yep.
And I'll polish up the minutes and post them.
Great. And again, if you haven't yet, please do put your name on the blue sheet. I mean, I guess you're kind of recorded anyway, but it's much better to do it right. And so with that, I think we're done for today. A little bit early, and that's good. So yeah, I think that's it, folks. So thank you. We look forward to some traffic on the list, those drafts, work group last calls, etc.
Thanks. Bye, y'all.
Well,
Okay, thank you.
bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.